From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Malathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. I'm super excited to get this podcast all done, recorded, and uploaded because I have some native shrubs that I've been gathering over the last month, and I'm going to plant them today. I've done my sheet mulching, everything's ready, and they're going to be going in. Fall's a great time to be planting native shrubs, but maybe you're getting catalogs in the mail, you're thinking forward, and you're really bewildered. Native plants, like how do I buy a native plant? Well, fear not. This week we're going to go down the hallway to the Garden Ecology Lab here at Oregon State University, and we're going to be hearing from Jen Hayes. Now, many of you might remember Jen from a previous episode. She's a PhD candidate here in horticulture, concentrating in entomology, and Jen has been working on native plants and nativars. You can go back and hear that episode, but she's also just developed a new information card that's going to be available through the Bee Advocates program freely to anybody in Oregon to learn how to identify a native plant. So in this episode, she's going to be joined by a guest host, Nicole Bell, who's going to be the guest next week. It's so exciting. But before we get rolling, I do want to mention the Garden Ecology Lab at Oregon State University has a new website. You should check it out. And also there is a survey going on native plants. I really encourage all of you to stop the recording and take the survey. You can access it at the following website. So type in the letters bit.ly /GEL, that's Garden Ecology Lab, so GEL plant survey. But you'll also find it on their website. If you go to the bottom of their page, it is gardenecology.oregonstate.edu. So without further ado, let's try and untangle the bewildering world of native plants this week with Jen Hayes and guest host Nicole Bell.
Welcome to Pollination. I'm your guest host today, Nicole Bell from the Garden Ecology Lab at Oregon State University. I am a graduate research assistant, and I'm joined today by one of my fellow graduate research assistants. It's me, Jen Hayes. And to set the scene, we're here sitting on my back patio. This is actually my childhood backyard. It is 75 degrees, and we were listening to the buzzing of some bumblebees and small carpenter bees, but it's really been overshadowed by the blue jays in the last 10 minutes, so you might hear some chirping and buzzing in the background. So we're here today to talk about Jen's work on deciphering the language of native plant tags, which, as I've learned over the past couple of years, is very complex, and it can be a really confusing process when you're looking to buy a native plant. But let's start with the basics. Jen, what is a native plant?
So I like to use an official definition when I tell people. So this one comes from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Native plants are the indigenous terrestrial and aquatic species that have evolved and occur naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat. Species native to North America are generally recognized as those occurring on the continent prior to European settlement. They represent a number of different life forms, including conifer trees, hardwood trees, and shrubs, grasses, forbs, and others. But there are different scales that we can consider plants to be native to, which might actually alter how someone talks about native plants. So you could say that something is broadly native to North America, or you could narrow it down and say, like, this plant is native to the United States, the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, or even the Willamette Valley.
Wow. Okay, so lots of levels there. And why would someone want to buy a native plant in the first place?
Let me count the ways. There's so many different reasons that someone may want to buy a native plant. So a lot of folks right now are really interested in ecological gardening or planting native plants for native wildlife like bees, butterflies, and birds, or planting gardens that mimic the natural landscapes that their garden is situated in. Native plants are often better adapted to the environment that they're native to as well, so that could reduce the amount of management that you might need in your garden, like reducing irrigation and other things. So choosing native plants is a great way to potentially increase the longevity of your plantings, especially if you think about if you live in Eastern Oregon, for example, and you want to plant a cherry tree for its beautiful spring flowers, a cherry tree that is native to Oregon will probably be hardier to the winters in this region compared to if you got a cherry tree from a nursery in Georgia and planted it there.
Okay, so why might I need help buying a native plant? Where does the confusion arise?
So, believe it or not, finding and buying native plants is really not always as easy as walking into any random garden store. It can actually be really difficult or really confusing to buy native plants. So, for example, for my research project, I had to locate 8 different native plants in relatively high quantities, and what I encountered during that process was inconsistency in labeling and the use of native terminology, especially when reading plant tags versus bags of seed, and even how plants are described on websites. So on some websites, I would use a little filter for native plants, and the plants returned would often be a mix of wild types and cultivars.
So for those of us that don't know, what is a wild type native plant and how is that different from a cultivar?
So a wild type is the form of a plant that occurs in wild populations, versus a cultivar is short for cultivated variety, and those are forms of plants that are developed by people rather than those that are naturally occurring. Sometimes cultivars are developed from naturally occurring varieties, so like if you've ever seen a beautiful field of camas, it's usually very, very purple, except you might see 1 or 2 white flowered stems. So that's an example of a naturally occurring form that someone could develop into a cultivar through selective breeding and propagation methods. But in particular, cultivars are bred to be distinct, uniform, and stable, and they also have a name. So a cultivar name is listed in single quotation marks following the scientific name of a plant. So for example, there is a yellow cultivar of yarrow that is really common around Corvallis, and the name of that plant is Achillea moonshine. So the genus is Achillea, and then moonshine is the name given to that cultivar.
Okay, so it's a lot more complicated than I thought ever before I learned about this. So tell me what you've done to help make buying native plants easier.
So I've created 2 handouts to help navigate some of the confusion when it comes to buying wild type native plants. The first is a pocket guide, which walks through how to read plant labels and tell cultivars from subspecies, from varieties, etc. And then the second is a little bit longer, and it actually walks through some resources you can use to find out if a plant is native to your region. It has a bunch of examples on how to read plant labels, and then also some guidance related to buying regionally adapted or genetically diverse plants.
Okay, need this in my life. How can I access it? Where can we find it?
So both the pocket guide and the longer handout can be found on our lab's website, so the Garden Ecology Lab's website, which is gardenecologylab.oregonstate.edu. We'll also put this in the show notes. And then the pocket guide will also be circulated at in-person events held by both our lab and the Pollinator Health Lab.
Amazing. So I'm in my car, I'm zooming to the local nursery. Walk me through what it might look like if I want to buy Clarkia, aka Farewell to Spring.
So Your experience is going to depend, again, whether you're shopping online or in person, and whether you're looking for a potted plant or seed. So I already know that Clarkia is native to the Willamette Valley, but if I wanted to double check, I would probably look at the USDA plants database and Oregon Flora. So I would look at the pictures on these websites to familiarize myself with what the native plant looks like in case I come across some cultivars during my search. And actually, since Clarkia is an annual and I don't have a lot of time on my hands, I would probably actually just buy some seed online. So I would go to my favorite nursery's website and search the scientific name of the plant into their little search bar. So in this case, I would type Clarkia amoena. And then I would click on the result that has a picture of the plant that looks like the wild type and see if the description mentions anything about native status or otherwise. For my own garden, I'm not really picky about where the seed was grown, but website descriptions are really great to read through if you do want to know more about the seed you're buying. And one other tricky thing I found on sites that do sell cultivars is the description will still say Oregon native plant, which isn't not true because it is originating from a native plant. It's just not usually the shape or color that we would find in wild populations. But this is where knowing what your plant is supposed to look like is helpful, and also knowing how to read plant labels. So I know that cultivars have names, so on this page I would look for a name in single quotation marks. If I came across something like dwarf white or scarlet after the scientific name, then I would know it's a cultivar. But if the picture matches what I'm looking for and there's no cultivar name and no mention of breeding for other traits, I would go ahead and order it.
Great. So what's a key takeaway that people should know about buying native plants?
So I'm in a lot of gardening groups on social media, and I think in this community, there's really a need for a black and white answer about what the best thing to do in your garden is. But I think something that I've actually taken away from my 5 years as a graduate student is that there really is no one right way to garden, especially when it comes to native plants and cultivars. Native cultivars are not evil. And if your goal is to plant for wildlife, like this hummingbird that just flew by us.
We've been visited.
Then you might choose wild types over cultivars. But if, for example, you absolutely love California poppy and you want your garden to be basically just a rainbow of different colors of California poppy, that is also totally valid and totally wonderful.
Yeah, and just for an example of that, the patio we're sitting on right now is very much a mix of native, non-native plants. We've got a goldenrod right next to us that's finishing up, but we also have plenty of non-native plants that we really just like and enjoy. So you can really make decisions about what makes you happy in your garden and still do a great job for pollinators and the environment at the same time.
Yeah, you definitely don't have to do all one thing. I think it's really wonderful when people include plants that are meaningful to them in their garden, not just plants that are maybe the most suitable ecological choice.
Right. So I need to know, what are your favorite cultivar names?
So some cultivar names are absolutely fabulous. This isn't a native plant example, but there's a butterfly bush called Flutterby Petite Tutti Frutti.
Amazing.
Which is, just absolutely fantastic. But there's also a yarrow that's called Strawberry Seduction.
Love her.
I think it's really fun when the cultivar name tells you something about the plant versus those that are just named after a person or some otherwise arbitrary combination of words.
Yeah, some of the names out there are really creative. So you can only choose 3 native plant species for your garden for the rest of your life. Which 3 are you choosing and why?
So this is actually pretty easy for me. I would choose a purple aster. It would depend what coast I'm on. I'm from Vermont, so if I was in New England, I would go for the lovely New England aster. But since we're in Oregon, I would go for Douglas aster. And then also goldenrod, because the two of those plants together is Mwah, chef's kiss. Absolutely
Amazing.
Beautiful. Purple and yellow. What more could you want? Actually, what more you could want is number 3, which is Farewell to Spring, or Clarkia amoena. It's a glorious little annual, and my selling point for people, especially those who like ecological gardening, is that if you plant Clarkia, odds are very high that some leafcutter bees will come and steal pieces of the petals. So that's one plant that you can put in your garden and almost immediately see the beneficial impact it's having on pollinators.
And I'll add, there's nothing cuter than watching a leafcutter bee use its little mandibles to cut a little crescent in the flower and fly away with it. So if you're lucky enough to see that, I don't know what to tell you other than you need to plant Clarkia in your garden.
Bee confetti.
Bee confetti. So, is there anything else you want people to know?
I don't think so. Both my guides will be available on our website, and the handouts will be around.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, Jen. Again, this has been Nicole and Jen featuring the Garden Ecology Lab takeover of the Pollination podcast. So thank you for listening, and have a great month.
Have a beautiful day.
Bye.
See some bees.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.